Tactics and strategy, I think, can have a huge effect very, very quickly and will change your grade by 1 to 3 grades, sometimes without any improvement in strength and endurance.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It's me, Ryan. How are you doing? I hope you're doing a lot better than me. Oh man, I'm recording this the day after St. Patrick's Day. The luck of the Irish was not with me yesterday. And I am quite Irish, so I'm a little bit resentful of those tricky leprechauns. But I was supposed to be out climbing today on an absolutely spectacular spring day. But yesterday evening, I took it upon myself to put together a new basketball hoop for my kids. And in doing so, I totally threw out my back. So here I am, laid up, heating pads strapped around my lower back, recording an intro to this pro clinic. But that's okay, because hey, I'm hanging out with you, and by the time this is out, by the time you're listening to me right now, complaining about my back will be better. And I think I'll be out climbing. I'm going to plan on climbing on this release day. So, hey, better days are ahead. Future Ryan, if you're listening to this as you're driving to the red, just know that it's all good. You're going to go send everything today. Okay, enough of the personal pep talk. I hope you're doing awesome, and I'm really excited for this pro clinic for you. Our good buddy, Tom Randall, is back. Tom's been on the show, I think, the most out of any guest that I've had on the show at this point in time. And then if you add on the day that I spent with him over on the YouTubes, where we struggled together out in Moab, we've become quite close, me and my British buddy over there, Tom. Oh God, don't listen to this, Tom. I'm on a bunch of painkillers right now. The stream of consciousness loopiness is in full effect right now. But what did we talk about today? Well, this is a pro clinic. I think this might be Tom's first pro clinic. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But in any case, we try to zero in on a topic. And the topic of this pro clinic is how to improve as climbers without getting stronger or fitter. And as Tom offers up in this conversation, he feels that there's a lot of us that could grab probably 3 grades of improvement in pretty short order just by implementing the ideas and the tips and the tactics that he lays out here in this pro clinic. So this one is worth the price of admission and then some. If you are a Patreon member or Apple subscriber, you get access to this entire thing. If you're just dipping in here to listen to the first half hour or so for free, you're going to get some great beta in there. And then I think you're probably going to want to stick around and either get yourself a free trial over on Patreon or Apple, or just go ahead and sign up and give me a few bucks. I'd appreciate that. And unlock the full episode here where Tom lays out the goods, and he comes from a hell of a point of view. He is a co-founder of Lattice Training, so he knows all about training. He knows how to get stronger and fitter. And then we throw all of that out in this conversation, and we just talk about how to get better without getting stronger or fitter. He's a hell of a rock climber himself, and he's an elite coach. He really knows how to wring the extra percentages out of every aspect of climbing. And there are things that I learned in this conversation that I've already put to use and that are already showing up in my performance on rock as well as at the gym. So I hope your training's going great, but set all that aside for a minute. We're not even going to talk about finger strength for a whole 90 minutes here, y'all. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Let's get ready to level up here with Tom Randall.
Did you see the photo I just sent you?
No, let me see. What'd you send me? What is this? Of your podcast setup? You got a 20-pound dumbbell holding up your microphone?
Yeah, because the kitchen table here is something like 3.5, 4 inches thick, and the clamp that the podcast mic fits to, it won't take a 4-inch breadth. And so I was like, what do I have that's heavy that I can clip this thing to?
This is the Trad Dad 2000 setup of podcasting now.
Oh dear.
You look great. How are you?
All good. I've been chuckling away some of the comments and some of the things that my friends have been sending me after putting the Trad Dad out there.
Oh my God. Dude, I was expecting this episode of you and I for the bat signal to go up for the Gree police.
Yeah.
And I think they're too afraid. I don't know what it is, but they haven't come out. They respect the Trad Dad too much to attack us for it. It's crazy.
I do wonder whether it's one of those things where if you go in so blatant from the start that this is not the way to do it, it sets the tone. And really, the things when it always kicks off a bit more is when you weren't expecting it. And then a few people kind of get on a bandwagon and then they're on it. Maybe it's just the nature of how the internet works. I don't know.
No, that's a good point. That's a good point because in essence, like Alex and I were using our we were intending to use our gree-grees as designed, and we're a little bit casual with it, as sometimes people get. And with the trad dad, you're right. We just went right at it. We were like, look, this is a hunk of junk. We don't think it's going to work. Why is it wrapped around my neck? And so, yeah, they've got nothing to attack us for because we were like, this is this is intentionally sketchy.
Yeah, exactly.
Although I didn't know going in, I think I found out after the fact that you hadn't been using, like for some reason I thought you had been like out using it, but I think we were essentially the pilot test phase.
Yeah.
Like we tested out the trad dad in a real world situation.
I'd taken it out with Spencer, who I do photos with sometimes, and we'd done a little bit of testing with it in there. But like in terms of actually going lead climbing, you were patient number one.
God. And here we are, living to fight another day. Oh, it was great. Well, that was really fun. And the climbing community at large seems to be really enjoying it. So thank you for taking me out for that day. It was amazing.
Yeah, it was a good laugh. I had so much fun.
Good, man. Well, enough about us. Let's talk about the topic at hand. And the topic at hand is one that will very much apply to me, which is how can we get better at rock climbing without getting stronger? And we put a lot of emphasis on this podcast about, ways to train, ways to get stronger. Obviously, as a founder of Lattice and a coach, you spend a lot of time talking with athletes and yourself focusing on ways to improve our fitness, improve our strength. And that's all well and good. And I'm sure maybe some of that will weave in and out of this conversation here. But essentially, I feel like there's a whole other bucket of low-hanging fruit here, especially for somebody like me and maybe some other weekend warriors who maybe put too much of an emphasis on strength training in some cases, because that's like the easiest thing to understand maybe, or the easiest thing to program is just like, okay, I'm going to go get a hangboard workout in, or I'm going to go and do like a tread wall workout and get some fitness. But there's this whole other kind of dark arts of like, how can we improve as climbers and maybe not add a single pound to what our max hang would be on a 20 millimeter edge. And so I'm excited to unpack this however you want. I'll hand it off to you, and I can be, a little bit of a sounding board for somebody who might be able to try to implement some of this into my, weekly, monthly, yearly schedule of climbing and training.
Well, I think it's a really good topic. One thing I want to address immediately is this whole thing of people like to look at strength training as the easiest or the most obvious or the most prioritized form of improving their climbing. And I think one of the reasons for that is it's one of the few facets of climbing performance which is quite easy to measure and compare yourself against others. There's so many bits that go into climbing performance which are really hard to put a number on and directly say, how do I compare to Ryan? How do I compare to Jenny, whoever that we're talking about down the gym or at the wall? And that means that it becomes obvious because you're trying to work out, well, this person's one step ahead of me in terms of climbing grade. So I want to look at that metric, and it's appealing to go and do that. Whereas things around your technique and your strategy and your mindset are so hard to put a number on that I think those become less appealing to be able to measure yourself up against others, but also apply yourself to, because it's harder against progress and know exactly where you're at. So the way that I tend to break this down in terms of areas that you want to look at for improvement is think of climbing as being 4 different brackets for performance: technique, tactics, physical attributes, and mindset. And I think each of those baskets you can go into and look at what are the addressable items that you can make improvements on, and how much will those impact your performance when it comes to your particular demands and what you're aiming for in the sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Both your first point there, which is like, okay, we see somebody who's maybe a few steps ahead of us, quote unquote, in their climbing journey on the grade they climb. Maybe you want to emulate them. And the easiest way to kind of match ourselves up or compare are the measurable things. And to your point with those 4 quadrants that you just mentioned, those 4 kind of pillars of climbing performance, the physical attributes are the ones that are the easiest to measure. Maybe every 3 months or 6 months, it's hard to measure one's mindset, on day A, and then 4 months later, try to measure it again. Although maybe you have some ideas on that. And similarly, I think with techniques and, like the skills, there's probably ways to measure. And I'd love to hear like how we do that. But maybe I'm getting sucked into the climber thing, which is just like kind of an obsession with measurement. And should one even go into this kind of exploration with measurement as an initial goal?
I think it comes down to how easy is it to produce a valid and reproducible measurement when it comes to any particular aspect. And the sort of the long and the short, or let's go for the short answer, is that it's really quite straightforward when it comes to strength in climbing and lots of physical attributes to climbing like power endurance, etc. But it is really objectively quite hard in all those other elements. And you can see that just by looking at the profiling that's done in climbing, but then also other sports. They all struggle in these other areas. I looked at the whole profiling of mindset or performance psychology in climbing quite a few years back, had a number of meetings with university professors looking at how they were doing them in other sports away from climbing. And it was just really qualitative. So it was much more subjective, language-based, and difficult to pin an exact answer on without either looking at a very specific group of individuals, which became a bit more comparable, or looking at very, very big numbers. And the conclusion for it was this is not quite appropriate for Lattice. So we left it alone and stuck with the strength elements or power endurance or endurance elements of measurement. But that, at the end of it, is to not say it's not worthwhile pursuing those things. You just have to find different ways of getting a rough measure of whether you're improving on those. And to give everyone listening a really simple way of doing this that I know I've mentioned before on a few different occasions, is this method of getting your closest climbing friends and partners to rank you on a sort of private, secret, score your friend on the different parts of their performance profile. So you get pieces of paper, and quite good on rest days when you're all climbing together, and you give all your strengths and weaknesses to all the other people in your group of what you think in all of those areas. So that physical, that tactical, that technical, and that psychological. And you can start to pick up patterns of where you're at. And you can even ask people, what would you even score me out of 10? And I'd say as a group crowdsourcing exercise, this is not the worst way in the world to work out where you are with all those things. And if you did that once a year, every year for 10 years, I think you'd see some changes in the patterns.
Yeah, that's really cool. I recall us talking about that. I haven't done it because I think I've been, I don't know, reluctant with my ego, I guess, to like essentially ask my friends. But you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm kicking into a new phase of wanting to level up some of my weaknesses and my performance. And so I really like that. And it's interesting to talk about doing it maybe yearly or every few years just to check out on where you're at. But that gives you a baseline, right, of where you're at. Might help you to focus if you've got a finite amount of time in each week to focus on something, which almost all of us, that's the case. If everyone is saying, hey, your mindset is a 3 out of 10 or your technique is a 3 out of 10, maybe that helps you to focus on where to go. But then we actually have to do the work. And so maybe that gives us a nice baseline, which is cool. And I think a lot of climbers out there who are the type of climbers like me who would like to log everything and journal and have a bunch of apps to track things, that could scratch that itch for like, okay, well, I'm measuring my finger strength. Let me also kind of try to get a baseline for where my technique is, where my mental game is. And I will shout out Chris Hampton too at Power Company Climbing, because he came out with like this movement assessment not too long ago that I took that I found to be really effective for essentially identifying within technique, within movement, where my areas of improvement lie for, it breaks it up down into like static versus dynamic versus, I don't know, there's a bunch of slate of things. So yeah, there are ways to kind of try and give us a baseline, but then we need to do the work. So do you want to break this into those categories and talk about how you might recommend we improve as climbers without getting an ounce stronger.
Yeah, sure. I think maybe the first one to go into would be tactics and strategy, because I feel like this is one that can apply to almost everyone and is really, really accessible. It's not even like a thing which is uncomfortable to deal with. I think most of us know that some of the mindset psychology stuff can be quite uncomfortable, can have a really long time to make changes.
But yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, you're like, oh, give me those 3 grades. I want those.
Let's go.
Or else you answer it and go, oh no, I do a fair old bit of that actually.
Right, I've already milked those 3 grades. Well, hopefully I haven't. So I've always even struggled with defining what tactics even is, but maybe you'll have some specific examples of where you feel the lowest hanging fruit is for us tactically as climbers. And that can be for boulderers, route climbers, trad climbers, indoor climbers. I'm not sure, again, if you want to break it up in style, but where do you feel the biggest opportunities lie with regard to tactics?
Okay, so it's 3 areas. And the first one I'm going to deal with is what I call chunking. So this is effectively how you break down your boulder problem or route, indoors or outdoors, doesn't really matter. And what you want to be able to do on anything that you're tackling, whether it's a 1-session project or a 100-session project, is break down that thing that you're trying to deal with into all of its component parts. So it's in individual moves, and perhaps you could call it individual sequences. It depends on how kind of granular you want to get on this. And you want to do a little bit of an analysis on all those little chunks within your overall ascent that you're trying to make, boulder problem or route, and work out where you sit on each of these chunks. And inevitably, with lots of climbs, at least 50% of it, straight away, you're like, yeah, I've got this sorted. I know the technique to use. I know how to move through it. I've got adequate power. I'm flowing well. This is all good. Write it off. It's all good. Now look at your tougher, harder part. And what you'll do is, as you filter through all of your little chunks, you'll notice that you quite quickly deal with a number of the semi-problematic chunks just by going, oh, well, I just need to go and practice that a couple more times. Or actually, I need to look at a different clipping position because that move was hard because it was in the middle of a clip or it made me tired for it. So I just need to adjust how I'm actually approaching the overall climbing picture on it. But then some of them, you'll notice you won't have particularly good answers for right away as soon as you chunk it down. And these are the areas where I would like to point people towards attaching all of their energy to dealing with this bit of problem solving, because they are often the ones which you end up avoiding because they don't have straightforward answers. And they are the ones which ultimately will limit your successful ascent, I think. And when it comes down to getting onto those 1, 2, 3 little moves or sections which are really causing you problems, that's where you want to go into them and go, right, is this a strength issue for me? Is it just more movement skill? Do I need to spend more time on this? Do I need to become more confident with it? Do I need to learn my flow into those movements and really refine those individual sections and put the vast majority of your projecting energy into those bits and getting those right really, really early on your projecting, because they're the gateway to everything. You can do 95% of the rest of your boulder problem or route really well, but if you've not tackled the couple of chunks which are causing you problems, then you're just going to get stuck. And the interesting thing is that I see a lot of people leave that stuff really late on in their projecting process. So then you're even creating a bit of sort of procrastination and delaying the inevitability, which is you have to deal with those, in air quotes, hard sections later on in your projecting process, which means it takes you even longer. And also you have a little bit less energy and psyched towards your project because you've already burnt it up on the early part. So get stuck into the problematic chunks right away, and you'll see some really good improvements.
Ooh, I like that, Tom. That's not the way I always tackle things. That's maybe not the way I ever tackle things. I tend to work out I mean, I think I fairly quickly identify the cruxes for me. And they may be not the actual cruxes. It just may be for me because of the way my style is or, whatever. I just climbed a route differently than like a friend of mine. But in any case, I think I tend to identify those somewhat soon. But then I do spend a lot of time kind of on the more moderate or easier stuff, trying to get flowy or doing low points. And there are some like tactics in there that I think are helpful. But you like this idea of identifying what you feel are those kind of gateway, like the bottlenecks, if you will, to the send, to progress, and then really trying to dial those in first, and then you go back and start to move into other sections. Do you go in reverse order or order of hardest to easiest in terms of the chunks?
It's really talking about just the investment of your time is the biggest, most problematic chunks within your projecting process are going to take you the greatest amount of time to solve them. Right. So to me, it always seems illogical to leave them till too late in the process, because I kind of see it like, in my head, I see it like almost like a Gantt chart and lots of horizontal parallel bars of time invested. So if you leave all the biggest, longest bars until the end and deal with all these little short bits, which could be run concurrently with dealing with the big, long, time-consuming bar,
sure,
you'll just get to the end faster. It's a bit like saying, I'm trying to build a house here, and actually the one thing which takes the longest is making sure that you've got legal permission to get the registration of the property sorted out when the property's finished and you can build it and you can live in it. If you didn't start that really early on, then you're just going to set yourself up with a whole load of problems.
Okay, great. Love that exercise. And that's something we can all do, to your point, whether it's indoors, outdoors, on a kilter board or whatever. You just identifying, hey, these are the chunks that are giving me the biggest problem. Tackle those first and work on the other stuff concurrently. Maybe when you're a little fatigued, you can go back and work out some other sequences, but make sure you're putting some energy into those hard chunks first. Okay, great.
Which is also another good reason why when you go and try your project on your first couple of sessions, go and look at all of the moves right away. Even if you think, I can't do these, just check everything out. Get a big picture overview and do that really early on.
Yeah, so good. Do you have any other tactical tips or ideas that you want to cover before we move on to the other pillars?
Yeah, so the other two things within tactics, which I think are really important and are also often ignored, are resting tactics and conditions tactics. And when I talk about good chunking, dealing with conditions and dealing with our resting, these are the things that really high-level elite climbers do really, really well. But lots of people in the kind of middle ground of experience, I don't think do the best. So when it comes to resting, it's understanding that when you're trying your project and you're hoping that you get to a successful red point at the end, you've got to treat your body like you're trying to taper the amount of total load that you give it. So that's the volume and the intensity, the overall workload that you're giving yourself. You're trying to taper that down somewhat towards the successful ascent. If you're just constantly ramping up and just becoming more and more tired, closer and closer sessions, longer and longer sessions before that Saturday when you're thinking, I have to do this just before I go away on my trip, your chances are really low actually for doing it because you're just so tired, you're not rested adequately. So basically bake that in to your projecting process that you effectively feel increasingly more rested towards that point when you actually want to send. And then the second one is the conditions.
Well, let me ask you about the rest before we move on to conditions, because I'm wondering, and obviously different projects take different timelines. Sometimes you go on a 7-day trip and you've got a project, and sometimes you've got a limit project that's at your local crag, and it could be a year or 2 years or 3 years or multiple trips. And I've experienced that, and I know you have as well. So it may be hard to generalize here, but is it essentially like a double camel hump where as you're leading up, you do want to take on more load and get, try to get the strongest and most prepared that you can, in which point you're going to be, pretty fatigued, and then start to dial it back down for X amount of days or time to let the system recover. And then you go try your red point attempts, and do you have any data on essentially like what seems optimal or what the kind of guardrails are for optimal rest prior to making those, those what will hopefully be peak attempts?
Yeah, you more or less got the concept right that you can see it as like a double hump. So often in your training preparation towards peak performance, you'll have a high training load, and then you'll bring that down towards peak performance, which means you often drop both the volume, some of the intensity, and the frequency of your training. Kind of classic, typical tapering behavior in terms of climbing training. So you go and try your project, you feel great straight away. But then you have to put the work in on the project, and you're psyched. You want to go to the crag quite a few days, and maybe your friends do as well. So in reality, a lot of the time, your training load often or training, because we're projecting, but it goes up when we're going into that projecting process. So we start to develop a fatigue again. But towards the end of that, you want to do that exact same behavior as you did before you went on the trip. And in terms of basic numbers, what you want to look for is you want to look for somewhere between a 40 to 60% reduction in volume. So overall duration of climbing overall to achieve kind of peak rested, tapered state when it comes to any climbing performance. Interestingly, actually, the intensity element doesn't need to be dropped down unless you feel like for you personally, that works really well. For the most part, for the clients and the people that we train at Lattice, both professional or amateur climbers, we keep the intensity really quite high to achieve that peak state. But you'll feel great if you drop the volume off. It just feels it can feel worrying and stressful to some people because they go, I'm going to lose fitness. I haven't got enough time on my project. But a rested climber, I promise you, feels a lot stronger and fitter than an unrested climber, no matter how well they're trained.
Yeah. And so just for like a practical example, if we could, when we talk about intensity, we're talking about like essentially how hard we're trying, like the level of difficulty of moves that we're making, right? And the volume would be maybe easier moves, but just doing a lot of them, if I'm understanding correctly. So if I'm looking at like a week, my typical week is right now 2 days of climbing hard boulders and 2 days of climbing routes, doing fitness. Might be on a tread wall, or it might be doing like, 2 routes in a row or that kind of thing, on an auto belay or if I get out to the Red River Gorge. And so that's like a typical week right now, which is like a base training week. So 2 bouldering days, maybe 1 day on a moon board, 1 day on the set problems, and then 2 kind of more endurance days. And if I'm going to be leading up towards wanting to send some hard things in the spring, what would you recommend I keep, and what do I lose, and what do I reduce from that kind of general schedule there? All right, this seems like a good place here to fade this out. I'm super sorry to do that. You're probably like, Ryan, what the hell, dude? Don't fade it out on me. I'm poor. Well, don't worry, poor fellow rock climber. I've been poor in my life, and I'm a little bit poor right now, actually. Podcasting doesn't pay what you think it would. So guess what? You can listen to the rest of this banger pro clinic with Tom Randall for free if you just sign up for a free trial. And let me tell you why I think it's worth it. Even if you just sign up for a month and then cancel, just listen to everything you can in a month and then cancel, which I hope you don't do. But if you do, here's what you're going to get out of this Tom Randall episode. Here's what we cover after the fade out. How to properly taper for peak performance, conditions tactics, indoors and out, a huge difference maker when it comes to sending indoor climbs. And I've already been putting this to use myself. If you're a board person, a sneaky little trick to send your project faster on the board. How to boost your stoke for a project and thus increase your performance. The first step in managing your fear of falling, both on rope as well as on boulders. How to tap into the 0.1% of tryhard that you might need in order to send that limit bouldering project. Again, another tactic that I've been using recently to great effect. Going from V5 to V8 by choosing the right technique for the move, and also how to build a proper technique library. The specific thing that sets Will Bosi apart, and the number one factor that Lattice data has shown to be the most impactful on outdoor performance: All that and just so much more is available for about the price of a beer over on Patreon or Apple subscriptions, or actually zero cost right now with a free trial. So if you want to hear the rest of this Pro Clinic, plus get instant access to more than 100 hours of other banger content, and I'm talking about Pro Clinics and bonus episodes from the likes of Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Dave McLeod, Hazel Finley, Tom Randall, Alex Honnold, and so many more. It is all over there, and I think it's worth a few bucks a month. But if you don't like it, you can cancel anytime. No worries, no questions asked. If you're a Spotify listener, you can subscribe through Patreon right there in your Spotify player to unlock all of those episodes. If you're an iPhone person, you can do it right there also in your podcast player by just double-clicking that side button to start the free trial and to subscribe. Or if you like to listen various places on your computer as well as on your phone, you can just swing over to patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show to support me there and get instant access to all of those goods. Now be sure to check your show notes for links from this conversation and how to work with today's pro, and you can see clips from this conversation over on IG at The Struggle Climbing Show. The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation and is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. This show was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by Glenn Walker. All right, what are you waiting for? Pop over to Patreon and listen to the rest of this Banger Pro Clinic. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And you know what? If you're struggling like me, well, let's just remember that the struggle makes us stronger. I'll see y'all.